Hey, welcome to another episode of Digging Deeper. Robert here with Brandon, who shared a great message in our Meltdown series on Jonah. Man, when you were kind of preparing through and kind of studying Jonah, what made you land? Because you camped almost exclusively in the fourth chapter, the last chapter of Jonah. What kind of gravitated you towards that section of the story and really kind of like made the Meltdown come to life as you were studying it and internalizing it on your own?
When I was looking at it, I saw that there was this great illustration I could have in the middle of my message. And I thought to myself, if I camp out on chapter 4, I could use Robert to be a worm on stage, and it will be perfect.
That's actually true. if you want a behind-the-scenes look, literally Sunday morning, earlier in the week, Brandon texts me and goes, "Can you find me a big leaf?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, I'll find you a big leaf." So I find him a big leaf, and then Sunday morning, he's like, "I had this idea. I need you to do the worm on the stage."
I didn't say you. I said I'm thinking about getting a volunteer to come up if they can do the worm, and then you go, "I can do the worm," and I was like, even better. So
that is what happened.
That's what happened. But
so that was Brandon's, and then he commanded me and said, "You must like do the worm." And then he started calling me worm on stage. I'm sure you saw all that. I'm just joking. No,
he's not joking. I really did call him worm on stage, but I didn't command you to do anything.
No, and it was not demeaning.
Seriousness of this.
How did you?
Really, because I feel like that. I mean, I feel like that. This chapter 4 is when Jonah says he wants to die 3 different times. Like he has the meltdown here. Like chapter 1, when he runs from God, you could say there's a meltdown there.
There's a meltdown.
But when you get to the point of like just wanting to end your life and you're getting so upset, and it kind of does have this temper tantrum feel to it. And I think that just in preaching the book of Jonah previous in different times, kind of knowing the arc of it, it's the main crux of Jonah, and what the author's intent is really encapsulates there in chapter 4. So that's really why I landed there.
It's true.
Yeah.
And yet I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was kind of a twist, because so often when Jonah is preached or taught, there's this focus on Jonah, the guy who ran away from God. Like that would be like the first meltdown that comes to mind for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was so insightful, and honestly, it was a great message that was so applicable and relatable right now to my life. I'm guessing to your life, to everyone. If you didn't listen to it, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. It's a great message, but it was so insightful to actually look at that meltdown in a whole different avenue and look at it from that perspective as well. And you kind of talked about this idea of the Ninevites and how much, the thesis statement of your message basically was, the meltdown that happens when you feel like injustice has occurred, right?
Yeah.
And so for Jonah, he really felt like the injustice was that the Ninevites were going to get mercy, right? That God's abounding love, and you're funny during that whole section. You're like, abounding in love, and that whole deal, so gracious. But you kind of went.
How dare you be so loving?
Why would you be so?
My wife says that to me all the time.
Does she? I say the same things, so there's a common theme for people in your life, but I'm joking. But, but you kind of talked about and said, you kind of challenged and put it back on us and said, so what are your Ninevites? Yeah. What are the people groups, or the people, or the individuals, or even the things that make you like almost throw mercy and forgiveness to the wind and say, I just want justice. I want what's fair, and so forth. And so I got to ask,
who are my Ninevites?
Who are your Ninevites? Yes.
Oh man. I don't have particular people by name at this point. Like I'm sure there's other moments I would have said, hey, that particular person feels like a Ninevite to me. Mine are more like straw men and women right now. Mm-hmm. We were talking before we started here. Like, I can get in trouble with some of this stuff. Maybe. My Ninevites right now are the pushers of cultural revolution that are not as empathetic as they seem to indicate, and are more demanding. That the way that they believe life should be lived, or permissions that should be granted, should be adhered to and accepted by all people. and not necessarily respecters of other people's convictions. That's extremely vague.
I would say you're being really vague. I know because we had a conversation
Yeah,
before
I mean,
this, but
I would say that like it's a hard thing because the minute I say right now, like sometimes the I would say the transgender movement. I would not say the LGBTQ plus movement. I don't necessarily equate the way in which certain things are happening in the transgender movement as being at the same level of what has taken place now or previous when those were advocating for same-sex relationships. I think that in those realms, like the scriptures speak pretty clearly on what God would deem to be best. And I know there are people who have very strong disagreement with that. I'm okay to say that we may see this differently. My ethic would be that we would still figure out how to cooperate and to love and to be kind and gracious in that process versus demanding. Okay. And I feel like that sometimes on a cultural level, I have not experienced this on an individual basis, like that somebody has said that you have to.
So it's a cultural level, you mean like in the media?
In the media.
Politics.
Yeah, and that this is a constant push, and even in educational circles and academic university settings, like that this is something that you have to believe. And if you don't believe this, you're a part of the problem. You're the one that's naive. You're the one that is uneducated and primitive because you still hold to the values espoused in that ancient book that we all know is just phony baloney. You know, like those are types of things that really they infuriate me, and I want to have meltdowns because it's like, wait, where's the common decency and where's the? You're talking about having this inclusivistic like attitude, but at the same time, this isn't inclusion. This is indoctrination, and you're saying this is what has to be believed. Now they may say the same thing, and I don't like saying he, they, she, like these pronouns, like pronouns in themselves, you know, like. But I'm saying like that there's a lack of civility, and I don't want to respond with a lack of civility in that, even though I feel great pressure that I'm supposed to conform in this regard, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you feel like almost a temptation to? Like when you see those posts on Facebook or something like that, I know that you don't have Facebook anymore, but when you did you ever feel the pressure to be like, someone's got to stand up for what's right. I got to respond to this. And
no,
okay.
No, that's not me. Just because I have no problem in the public forum and public square in person, speaking in those things, because in those arenas, through those mediums, I can read body language. I can hear intonation of people's voices. I can actually sense or feel compassion, empathy, or anger. I can't when I'm typing and reading. So it's like, for me, it's just like, I don't find it very fruitful to engage in that new form of public square,
which seems to be the most prevalent.
Absolutely.
Social square.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah.
Communication technique.
So, and I don't think that that's the end all be all, the most important thing to like right now, like have to like be for or be against, you know, like there's other things. So I don't let it preoccupy everything I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it just feels like in everything I do that has to do with some type of online media or TV or news, like that is the most predominant topic that seems to be pretty like
pushed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it feels like a little bit like an injustice is what I'm hearing you say, where it's kind of
like... But
the
moment I say even that group, I'm not saying I see them on par with the Ninevites in terms of like these people that like exercise brutal things in the lives of the Israelites and were violent. Like I'm not equating that at all.
Okay. I hope that's clear to everyone else. It was clear to me.
Not equating that at all. So you just got to like be overly clear because someone can quickly take a soundbite
and take it with you. But if you watch the message, and I encourage you to, Brandon, you gave a bunch of different examples of different people's
opportunity offender.
You really emphasize that. You know?
Equal opportunity offender. I want everyone to know I am trying to get underneath everyone's skin in this room.
And so he picked on every polarized side of every disagreement, argument, and so forth. You know, sometimes for me, the Ninevites in my life, quote unquote, oftentimes happen in like the most mundane things, like on the freeway. right? We're like,
You Ninevite!
sometimes I scream at people as they cut me off, and I'm like, you Ninevite.
That might be a good way to actually like start to express our
over.
frustration, because most people be like, what did you,
what
did you
say?
call
A
me?
Ninevite. No, but it's like, there's moments like that too where I think that we can almost dehumanize people.
Yeah.
And so whether it's in the car or whether it's, someone cuts in front of you in line somewhere, or, someone takes the last bit of something or takes all of something that you needed something of at the store because there's some kind of pandemic going on or something like that. But those are the things where when you feel like someone is being unfair, that you can start to dehumanize people. And I think that was your point of really kind of this idea of a Ninevite, where we lose our compassion quotient because our justice meter gets elevated so high.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Anytime you remove the flesh and blood from someone and bring them back to a particular stance or category, then there's dehumanization.
Yeah.
So,
and I find that it's easier for me and maybe for other people to identify who my Ninevites are. But you posed this question at the end that kind of reversed it. And you said, what are the times that you've been a Ninevite?
yeah.
And you didn't give any examples. You didn't give us that whole list of examples. And so I want to know, what are some examples of how we ourselves can end up becoming Ninevites?
Well, I mean, if one of the atrocities of the Ninevites was their dehumanization of people, anytime we choose to just look at someone and perhaps it's sitting on the side of the street and not have something in our chest, we might not be able to help every single person, but to be like, oh, that's their fault. Oh, drug addict, idiot, stuff like that. Those are moments that like I am exercising the same heart position that led to what the Ninevites did. I would say that there's ways in which we are Ninevites just in our actions when we go our own way versus what God said is best in His way. Like, we are essentially rebelling against the Creator, saying that we know what's better. And so any aspects of disobedience, because one of the aspects, I think, to be fully obedient to God is to be fully human. So to be disobedient to God is to start to move towards dehumanization. So when we live in a state of disobedience, we're dehumanizing both others around us and ourselves. So to me, that's how are you a Ninevite in your own right? It's like when I'm disobedient to God.
Man, that was philosophical. That was
tapping
deep.
into some Dr. Goodman
that
right
was
there.
That was a good stuff, man. I was like, that
There's
was
your
deep.
sound clip, Dawson.
That was so deep. There you go. Now he knows. But it's still kind of like, as you're talking yesterday during the message, and even as you're talking now, there's still pieces of me inside somewhere that are like, it still seems unfair, right? Where there's like, you want justice to happen, and you're kind of like, if things are wrong, like, then there should be like some kind of balancing of the scales and things like that. But mercy isn't always fair, right? It doesn't necessarily, we don't get what we deserve, thank goodness, right? Like that's, and you kind of even said that, like, should Brandon Grant get what he deserves? Like, I hope not, because I'm doomed if that's the case, right? I could say the same thing. Should Robert Pedroza get what he deserves? I hope not, because then I'm doomed. And so, but this idea of fairness is still a high value, I think, for us as human beings.
Yeah.
And yet, there's moments in life where it feels like God isn't fair, right? And that's kind of Jonah's lamentation right here. He's kind of like, it's not fair. These Ninevites, they hurt my people. They don't deserve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is a specific time in your life where you experience maybe God not being as fair as you would hope, or at least according to your definition or your perspective of what fairness would look like?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind on an individual level first is, I remember when I was, and this is right when I was a senior in high school, and I've mentioned this many times over, when I was arrested for drinking and driving. It was only I think it was the second time I'd ever drank in my life. And here I am getting arrested, staying the night in jail. And I had tons of peers that drank way more than 2 times in their life. And here I'm the one that, I'm like, why did I get caught?
Yeah.
Why am I the one that has to have the example set for them and all that kind of stuff? And so I remember, even at that time, I wasn't a Christian. I believed in God, but I hadn't given my life to Christ. I still remember being angry in the jail cell that night, being like, why? What in the world?
Yeah.
but I mean, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. So that's why it led to me being invited to church and eventually becoming a follower of Jesus. I think now, I'm sure there's other examples, but as I was mentioning to you, I think more in terms of really empathetic sides of, I resonate with where Jonah's complaint and his meltdown was really based towards the character of God. And so I think in terms of like, so here to bring this full circle to what I said earlier about like where you felt like where I have the most frustration, who's my Ninevites.
Yeah.
I also probably have the greatest empathy there, because someone who is born with same-sex attraction, man, I would understand if they wanted to rail and be upset with God. Because my proclivities to give in to certain sin don't prohibit me from being with someone I love. And that one does, scripturally. So I would be like, that's not fair. You're a loving God, then why can't this like potential attraction go away, or why can't I exercise this? And that's hard. If I'm a Palestinian right now, what did I do to wake up on this side of the planet in the midst of this generational discord between two nations, and now I have to like somehow shelter my kids from bombs that I don't care one side or the other, really. What did I do?
Yeah. You just call it.
And I thought you were loving. I thought you were like, where are you? Like those are things that can really send me down like some pretty dark places as far as like questioning God's character when I try to put myself in situations that I am not in, but if I were in, I understand why there's hurt, pain, confusion, frustration, and lament.
We need to talk about that, I think, because I think that there's a lot of people listening and a lot of people in general right now that are asking questions just like that, right? Like, if God is good, like, how about these circumstances? You brought up two great examples of that. When you kind of start to come to those thoughts or questions, how do you, because I think a lot of Christians, this is what trips them up and even sends them down, you kind of mentioned this rabbit hole or this spiral, so forth. Some Christians will be swallowed up by those kind of questions and not know how to reconcile that with the idea of what this book says about who God really is and how his goodness is there. How do you as a Christian, as a mature Christian believer, navigate questions like that and still come to the conclusion that God is good, God is just, and God is best?
I mean, I think for me, it starts with a more robust definition of what's good.
Explain that.
Well, I think a lot of times we just think good in terms of what's best for me, what benefits me, what somehow gives me happiness, pleasure, fulfillment, flourishing, which that is a part of being good. But the more robust side is like, there's also things that I see in Scripture, or even personally, right? I was arrested.
Yes, I was going to say
that's not good, but it was good.
Yes.
So I have to put both of those categories in the one definition of good to make it more comprehensive. And when I look at the breadth of Scripture, I see God's goodness more in that robust term versus in the narrow side of just like what's for my best. I take time to try to evaluate, okay, this happened in this particular era, or this happened to this particular person or people. What came out of that? And did God, as Scripture's promised, work in that and through that to bring about the good?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is like people think and operate differently. When I look at the scales and I start to measure like what has come out of something that's good or how God works for the good, like I find more evidence saying, yeah, that this is true. I also would just say that, I think that oftentimes it's okay to like acknowledge that you're not okay and frustrated with this and share that with other people and not try to keep it to myself and help other people speak into the situation. So I've taken in a lot of voices at times to say like, help me in this and help me see this from a different perspective versus trying to just keep it to myself.
Okay.
I can't say definitively that like I can give you the end all, like, because I can go there and I can get like really sunk in there for a little bit. And I thankfully, I have a life that has given me a lot of credibility in what I believe. But not everybody has that life that gives them that credibility, and they still feel like, well, I did all these things, but where was God? Because the tables haven't turned in my direction like I thought they would.
So when you say you have a life that gives a lot of credibility, are you saying that you've seen God's blessing show up in your life?
To which I would, yes.
Okay.
How it's not the only blessing, but like I have had fortunates. I have had God intervene. I have had God in a miraculous way reveal to me my wife and give me an incredible person to live with. I have had 4 healthy children up to this point that are I don't have to worry about all the medical complications currently or psychological aspects. Like God's given me favor in the ministry realm to lead a good life, make a good salary, to have a good living. Those types of things.
Yeah.
It's easier to process the goodness of God when life is good for you. And I think that a part of me, then the other piece of it is like, how do I work through it? I have a lot of, I like to think I do. I have a lot of self-reflection and self-awareness where I know what I don't deserve, what I do that people don't know that I do, what I think, what people know I don't think. In areas where I'm like, at the end of the day, I know I am sometimes as much a part of the problem as I'd like to believe the solution. And that helps me balance out my frustration because my circumstances and my setting might help me not give way to some of the things dark within me.
Yeah.
But if I had that darkness within me and my setting was, going back to the other example, like Palestine or something, like, I mean, or just poverty or feeling like I'm on the opposite side of a race issue, like those things would quickly infuse infuriation and frustration and what's going on. But like, I feel like sometimes the balance for me comes because of the life I have. And I don't know what to say. Like, I'm just being honest like that. And that
I appreciate that honesty. One thing I'm baffled by and also in awe of, amazed by, is when you look at, like, for instance, Christians in India that are living in great poverty.
Yeah.
Like when we talk to like Shankar, who you're going to get to hear his name a little bit more. He's going to be someone we're going to partner with for Christmas offering stuff. I don't want to give all that stuff away, but
no, I've already announced it.
Okay,
Sure,
I was like, did I
good.
just get that away? Okay, but you know, like when we talk to him and listen to, you know, people that are living in oftentimes extreme poverty in India, and the faith that they have in the goodness of God despite their circumstances.
Absolutely.
And sometimes almost it gives them a perspective to be able to see what's good even clearer.
Yeah.
You know, you talked about in your message yesterday, you talked about this idea of when we're comfortable, then that shade leaf is over us, then maybe we're not as like infuriated by injustices.
Yeah.
Right? Our justice meter isn't as alarmed.
Yeah.
But as soon as we're uncomfortable, then we start throwing our fits and things like that. I couldn't help but think about those third world countries and think about how the Christians sometimes, like, by all intents and purposes, they are not comfortable, but they will find comfort in a different perspective, in a deeper way. And I feel like they've unlocked something that
Absolutely.
I, for one, want, you know? And so I don't know if you have any insights on that, or what that is, or how to kind of gain that in today's westernized, you know, environment that we are in, because we are, by all intents and purposes, pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
We start to get uncomfortable when gas prices get high, right? Like, if they had a car, that would like change their generational wealth in some other countries and places. And so it's just a matter of perspective, and, you know, it's relational to what you have and what you've always had as well, you know? And so how do you feel like materialism, comfort, and all these different things kind of like play into our definition of what's fair and unfair?
Oof.
I know it's a layered question, but
How does it play into our definition of fair and unfair? I mean, I think that because we're accustomed to having so many luxuries and amenities, that those aren't seen as gifts. Those are just seen as necessities that we should have.
Yeah.
And so if we don't have them, we cry, that's not fair. When most of the world will be like, well, then it's not fair. You know, I don't have that. So I think that, like, we just have to realize that we're, you know, like, the fishbowl that we swim in is that based with materialism, consumerism, abundance.
Yeah.
I mean, our poorest of poor are most times richer than the people
Wealthiest.
in another part of the world. Yeah. So I have to realize that. I hate this to admit it, but like maybe I'm wrong, but I just know I have a weaker faith than some of those people in India. It's anemic. I feel like it's like I have some type of deficiency in my spiritual life based upon the setting I live in. And that's just the reality.
It's just real.
It's just real.
Yeah.
So I have to own it. I have to repent of it. I have to keep trying to challenge it. I have to put myself in different contexts, different friendships, different relationships, to go to different places to see that what I have is maybe not as common as what I think.
Yes.
And I also just realized that like I could live this aesthetic life and not have things, not do things and all this kind of stuff, or kind of be like monks or like, the desert fathers and stuff like that. But like, that's just, God, maybe he's going to do that to me. This is not real. Like, I just realized that my faith is not as strong, and it's because of the condition of where I live. So I have to grasp even more because of materialism and wealth to try to find God where they've already found God because they're not clinging to materialism and wealth. And it's a richer, pure thing that I can learn from and aspire to and ask for. And it is inspiring to me.
It's inspiring to me too. And I think you hit on some of like the ways that we as American Christians can continue to grow towards that kind of faith too. You kind of talked about what I think is sometimes the greatest weapon against a Ninevite mentality. I kind of wrote down in my own notebook this idea of like, how do I change my perspective from seeing people as Ninevites and seeing them as neighbors, right? Because the other side of that question is that
You put
question,
two ends in?
Yeah.
You had alliterative things there?
Yes,
Robert?
Ninevites, neighbors. But, the other side of that is like the question, who is my Ninevite, but also who is my neighbor? Like that's the other
Jesus'
side of the question.
definition, your neighbor is your Ninevite.
That's what I'm saying. And so kind of growing towards that, I would say that the biggest combatant against having a Ninevite type of mentality is to be someone who would be like serving other people, right? Like it's harder to see the person who's dealing with a drug addiction and is living on the street as inhumane or less than if you're serving them, right? You start to get to know them. You start to go there. And you kind of mentioned that, right? Like the idea of like, you've got to like go and travel to different places and talk to different people and open yourself to different experiences and things like that too. How have you seen serving in your own life change your perspective about people or people groups that you have previously labeled as Ninevites?
Well, serving, when I'm serving, not just providing a need in the moment and moving on, but like actually getting to like hear their story and know, what precipitated this situation that goes back to putting flesh and blood on something and not a category. Like, I was listening to a podcast, I think last week, that Carrie Newhoff did an interview with John Christ. And John Christ was the comedian that, Christian comedian that for a while had to like take some time off and went to rehab and now he's back. But what Chris talked about was he thinks every person should go to rehab. And he said what he found in the rehab setting was how much more empathy he gained. Because he goes, I probably listened to 100 different stories in there of people. Wow. And he said, the moment you start to hear their stories, their grievous and heinous actions that you would look at just on like, oh my gosh, that person did that. He's like, you quickly start to like see like, oh, that happened to them in this time, and this is the decision that led to this, and you start seeing the pre-scripted story before the actual like carried out, and he said he grew a heart for them. And so I think the power of one's story and relationship in serving, it really helps you start to like care about the people in a genuine way. Even the people here at Rise City or the people in our community. Anytime I start to befriend or or have conversations with some of our transient individuals that love to like make their stop here, it's just different. Versus if I'm just like, get out of here. Like, I don't just like, get out of here, but I pull up and there's like 7 or 8 of them. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like, I can feel my empathy meter change when the story's not attached.
Yeah.
So.
That's good. Yeah. And the last thing I want to talk about today is is I think kind of finding that balance, because I think Christianity in general swings this pendulum between, you might say grace and truth. You could also say judgment and mercy, Ninevites and neighbors, right? You could kind of whatever you want to define that as. And Christianity, as far as I can tell, has never really done, maybe not never, I shouldn't say that, but they've had a hard time finding a balance between those two things. They'll either, really dig into God as the righteous judge or God as the redeeming savior. And it's like, and one side seems to enable a lot of sinful behavior. The other side seems to pedestal self-righteous mentalities. As Christians in today's day and age, where we definitely have extremes in our culture, like you kind of pointed out before, how do we find a balance that holds both of those things, that respects God as the righteous judge, and experiences and looks towards his holiness, but at the same time also will embrace his mercy and have a heart like his that's willing to forgive others and see people as neighbors? How do you hold that balance? You just looked at me like, are you crazy?
I'm not thinking you're crazy.
Okay.
That's a hard one, because I think personality really causes you to lean in one direction over the other.
Ooh, explain that a little bit.
I just think that like sometimes like if you go with like an Enneagram, for example.
That's your favorite one.
I don't have a favorite. My daughter, at least, is like getting into these personality tests, so she's giving me lots of labels now.
Okay. Yeah.
But someone that's like a 8, like they're really like, they're justice minded. They're less just like soft around the edges. I don't know. But then someone who's a 2, who's a helper, they're going to lean in the grace category. So sometimes you're type A, type B personality, like they just gravitate in one direction over the other. I find that a lot of the only way that helps is just having awareness, that you have to have an awareness of what grace and truth are, and grace and truth are held together by love, right? And I growing up, I've always said this. It's interesting. Like I don't know if I'm kind of a mutt in the personality test, because all mine are like flatlined. It's like I don't have like, it's like, which can drive me nuts, because at times, because I'm just like, I feel like I can relate to a lot of people but do nothing.
It's not true.
But my mom was grace and my dad was truth.
Okay.
And so my dad was the one who brought a lot of emphasis on like, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what we said, this is the standard. My mom was the one that you'd come to like, can you save me from dad? Like, and she'd be like, shh, don't tell dad. And you'd do it, But I watched that grace truth dynamic in my household, and I was really formed in that arena. But what I had is I watched my mom and my dad have an incredible marriage and really love each other. And so it was like, they held great respect. My mom held great respect for my dad's truth factor, and my dad held great respect for my mom's grace factor. Ooh, and when both of those were held in equal respect, love was fostered. So if you have the propensity to lean in the truth category, you got to find ways in which that you can figure out how to figure out where grace is at and have respect for it so you can embrace it. And if you're in the grace category, you got to realize that not everything is just like, ooh, warm sunshine and daisies. Like, where's the truth piece? And I just, I don't know. I just think that sometimes we're not willing to take steps back to think and process and to put ourselves in different camps that are unfamiliar to what we are. But the more we do that, it helps us have humility, self-awareness. And I would say scripturally, it's love. Like it's grace and truth held together in love.
Yeah. Empathy is a great word for that.
Yeah.
Idea of you can be strong in what you know to be true and still have empathy for those who believe different. And have a conversation.
Which is what we see.
Relationship.
Why I think Jesus is the most provocative person ever to walk the planet, because he held both those so well.
Yeah.
Right? He was the embodiment of grace and truth.
Yes, he was.
And so that's why we're going to fail. Like, we're not always going to get that right because we're not him, but we need him. And the more we have him, I think we move in that direction like him.
Well, and that's powerful to know that we have a flesh and blood example of Jesus who walked amongst us and lived a life not just like us, but lived a life, in flesh and blood as a human being on earth, and did it perfectly.
Yeah.
And so we have a real life example to watch and try to be like and grow toward.
And to know that Jesus was essentially God in the flesh. Right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So that is who God is.
Yes.
That's why I can read one passage in Jonah where he's like, daggone it, you're gracious and merciful and compassionate, abounding in love. And then other times, hey, let's not forget, he was going
Gomorrah.
Well, yeah. He was going to smoke out the Ninevites.
Yeah.
Like, let's not forget that. Like,
There you go.
you got 40 days, bro. And if you don't turn, you're going to burn. Like, so like there's that side of it too.
Yeah.
So both of those aspects of God's character are in that passage. Jonah just didn't like the one aspect in that moment because that aspect wasn't going in his direction.
It's true.
So,
good.
Yeah.
Well, good conversation, man.
Yeah, thanks for your questions.
Philosophical at times and deep, but a lot of questions. I hope if you're listening that you're encouraged to ask questions, and then also, I love what you said. Keep talking to other people about it as you navigate through it and grow to become more faith-filled, trusting in God's goodness, all those kind of things. And
I got one question before we wrap up.
Okay.
Do you think this table's large enough for those watching on YouTube? You could do the worm real quick.
Yeah. Okay. Just a second. So, if you're listening, I just did it. So that was amazing. That was amazing.
Wow.
So it was so fast you didn't even see it. If you're watching on YouTube, no, that's a wrap, man.
Yeah.
We're done.
We're done there?
We're done.
All right. Well, we'll keep doing meltdowns this week. Pete's going to be talking about the meltdown of Elijah.
Oh man.
So meltdowns that take place when sadness and overwhelming circumstances and even depression are prominent, and it just shuts you down. So should be really powerful, and we'll talk about it next week on Digging Deeper.
We'll see you then.
All right.